To get started on this exercise, you should have downloaded the Tonal Practice JPEG from the class Moodle site. To open it up, we can go into Photoshop. Let's go up to File, down to Open, and locate wherever you downloaded that JPEG to. With it selected, we can say Open, and this is the image that we want to be able to work on. Now, before we get started, let's make sure we have all of the appropriate panels that are open. If you look on the right-hand side, we need to have your color panel open. It really doesn't matter the kind of color picker that you have. I prefer the circle wheel, but if you have the hue cube, you can also keep it there as well. The other palette that we need to have open is our layers panel down at the bottom. We're going to be adding on more layers to this one. Also, within your tool panel, we're primarily going to be using the pencil tool for this particular exercise. If you can't find the pencil tool, remember it's hiding underneath the brush tool. And down at the very bottom is also where we can pick some of our colors. Once you've got the pencil tool selected, pay close attention to all of the options that are at the very, very top. Remember, if you can't find any of the panels that I've mentioned, you can always go to Window and then locate the panels up in the top up here. Now, the purpose of this exercise is to get you practicing seeing and drawing different tonal values. You've probably done something like this before in a drawing or a basic design class, but if you've never done it on a digital drawing tablet, this is going to introduce you to a lot of different ways of thinking about drawing. Now, of course, when I talk about tones, we're not talking about color in any way. We're going to be working strictly in shades of gray. Another word for tone that I use interchangeably is going to be value. So if I use the word value, tone, even grayscale, those are all interchangeable. We want to be able to recognize the highlights, which will be your purest whites, your darkest darks or your shadows, which will be pure black, and then shades of gray or midtones and everything in between. Now, whenever you do these kind of drawings, we're going to divide it up into the 7 basic tones. And as long as you can see these 7 tones in whatever subject you're drawing, your drawings tend to look very, very natural, and they tend to come out much, much more professional. Now, for the highlights, remember, this row is going to be kept pure white. For the darks, this is going to be kept pure black. What we want to be able to do is gradually transition from white to black within each of these inside of here. So let's get started and I'll show you how we're going to set this up. The first thing we can do is go down to our layers panel and let's create a new layer by clicking on the new layer icon on top of the background, and we'll call this our drawing layer. Everything that we do is going to be done inside of this layer, so do make sure that it is selected and not your background layer. All right, now let's set up our pencil tool. If you haven't done so already, go ahead and select the pencil tool from your toolbox. Remember, it's hiding underneath your brush tool. And let's look at the options under the little drop-down icon. For this exercise, I don't want to use any of the default brushes that come with Photoshop. We can get into those a little bit later. What I want to do is I want to work with some of the special legacy brushes. If you don't see the legacy brushes added to your list, you can go to the little cogwheel at the top right-hand side and choose Legacy Brushes. This will ask you, do you want to restore it? We'll say OK. And that'll add the folder to the bottom of your list. You can open it up. And the brush that I want to work with is found under the Dry Media Brushes. You can scroll down, you can see there's lots of different ones to work on. I want to use the Graphite Pencil. With Graphite Pencil selected, you can see at the top is where we can change the size and the hardness and even the tilt of it. But for now, I'm just going to keep it by the default. If you want to test this out, you can start to draw around on it. I'll back out a little bit. You can see that this brush is pressure sensitive, so if I draw lightly on it or if I press down hard, it will make a thicker or a thinner line. Now, at any time, if you need to undo what you've done, remember you can go to Edit and Undo, and it will step back and undo all the squiggles that you've created. Now let's tackle painting the different tones. Starting with this first column on the left-hand side, we want to paint values only within each of the different squares that you see. Now this is going to be relatively easy to do. If you look at your color picker, you can see this is already divided up into all the different values. So all we need to do is to place and select the appropriate value from here. You can also do this by changing up the slider that's along this area as well. So if I needed a 50%, I can set it right about 50%. If it's off by a little bit, that's okay. But a good mid-tone will be our medium value that we can paint within this area. With my tool selected, I can go in and just carefully paint in this particular side. Now, of course, if you need a larger brush, it'll go a little bit faster. Let's bring this all the way up to about 100 pixels. And by the way, if you go outside the edge, totally fine, but I do want you to keep it nice and neat. Now we can go, once we fill this one in, let's go up a little bit lighter. So a low light and then a light will move our slider over just a bit, so we'll pick it up. This is closer to a low light. Return back to our painting, paint in the low light. And then return to a highlight, which will be up to this position. Again, if your painting goes a little bit outside of the bounds, I'm okay with that. Now we can focus on doing the darks. If we return to our color picker, remember this would be about mid-tone, so we want to go a little bit below that and choose a low dark. Then we can return a little bit more and do a regular dark. And then finally we can go all the way down to do a pure black. Now that we've got our tonal values created for this one, we can use these as a reference for all of the other tonal values that we can create for the different columns. Let's try it with the hatched line column. Now this is going to pose a unique little challenge. First off, make sure you have the solid black as your fill drawing color. Next, whenever you do your drawing, we want to make sure your lines are nice and consistent and uniform. If your paintbrush is too thick like this, you can see how it very quickly goes from thick to thin. To make it look a little bit more uniform, I'm going to bring the size of my brush down to about 20 to 25 pixels. Should be about right. That looks good. Now when I draw, everything will look nice and consistent. It's okay if it does get a little bit thin. We can always work with this. Also, if you ever make a mistake from this point, of course you can do Command Z to undo or back out, but you can also select your eraser brush. The eraser tool works just like a regular brush tool, so you can go up and you can change the size of it. But with that one, you can go back over and erase away everything that you've done, then go back and reselect your pencil. What we want to do is to create a density of lines that goes within each of the boxes just by using lines and overlapping one another. Now, of course, the closer they are, the darker it's going to seem. You can have all your lines going one direction, or I'll let you do cross-hatching, which will fill it in a little bit quicker. The main thing is getting used to using line work as a hatching method of illustration and drawing is a good way to practice using both your digital drawing tablets and your training your eye to see these different values. What I'm wanting to do is to build up all of these values of hatching. Now this is going to start to get a little bit more messy. That's okay. We're just going to do it this way by drawing lines and keeping them nice and straight within that particular area. Once you've built up a medium one, then simply work your way all the way through getting lighter and darker for all of the other values. All right. Remember, if you need to go back and do any more contrast or rework any of the different value squares, simply use your eraser, erase it away, and start over again. To do the dot stippling is going to be another unique challenge. This particular brush doesn't work well to create a variety of dots, meaning they don't show up if I just dot dot and try to create simple marks. I really have to create a line, and even then it doesn't give me good consistent results. So we need to swap over to a different style of brush. The brush that I'm going to recommend is going to be your permanent marker brush. It's located just below the graphite pencil. Now with the permanent marker, we can always change the size of it. We'll make mine about 36 points wide. And with this one, this will allow me to create a variety of different dots, and you can see they are that size. Now, of course, the larger brush you have, the more area it'll fill out. But the smaller size brush, if I brought it down to about half that size, will allow me to do smaller little areas to fill in with this. So you can do a variety of different dot sizes. The main thing I'm looking for is going to be the dot density in order to create the look and feel that we want. So let me zoom in. Actually, I'll keep it at regular zoom. I'm going to keep my brush at about 15 pixels. That seems to be good. And let's see if we can fill in the medium portion of this. Remember, we're doing just dots on this all the way around, no lines, no other marks, and we're working in a solid black. Remember, you can change the size of your brush, maybe bring it down a little bit more. If you wanted to fill in a smaller area, you can vary up that size too. Great, now that I'm satisfied with the mid-tone, let's work with the lighter and then the darker tones. All right, with that done, if you were paying close attention, you'll notice that I started off with some relatively small dots up here, and as I got darker, I swapped over to larger size brush to give me darker dots down at the bottom. That's totally acceptable for this exercise. The main thing is pay close attention to the density of those dots to make sure you've got a good gradual transition of tones from very dark to very light. For this fourth column, this is going to be another unique challenge. We're going to be working in a hatch effect. So with our pencil tool, let's go ahead and swap back to that charcoal pencil that we were using before. Excuse me, our graphite pencil that we were using before. So it has the pressure sensitivity, thick and thin lines. And we want to be able to work using black and white in order to create the tonal value within here. I've already given you the midtone, so nothing should go in this middle value. But as we get lighter, we want to create white hatch lines that goes all the way up to our highlight. And as we get darker, we want to add black hatch lines all the way down to a solid black. So with this, we've got our fill color set to black. Let's go ahead and work through our black lines, starting off with our lowest darks. Just as we did before with these hatches, pay close attention to the density of it. But in this case, we don't want it to be as dense of drawing as what we see here. We want it to get more and more dense as it comes down to this one. So maybe just a few hatch lines here, and then the next one, get a little bit darker. And then finally, almost a solid black for our darkest darks. All right, with that finished, notice how it only took a few dark hatch marks in order to create this low dark. Same way for our darkest dark. We didn't need near as many hatch marks simply because we're starting off with our midtone as the background. Finally, once you reach the very darkest dark, all you had to do was fill it in solid with black, and even leaving just a few little dots there still gives the illusion of it being very, very dark. Now in order to make it lighter, let's choose our white. So we'll go over to our color picker, pick white as your foreground color, and do the same thing going up in value. In this case, we just need a few hatch lines to make that more of a mid-tone. This way just a few of the gray shows through, and then a few more to make it lighter. And then finally, the most for the solid white. All right, now let's do the same thing with our white stipple dots. In this case, I've given you the final darkest black value, and we want to work in just white by adding the tonal values going all the way up to solid white. As I've done with the other ones, I'm going to start off with my medium, and then we're going to go to the two extremes. The first thing I'm going to do is make sure I go up to my pencil tool, and let's select my permanent marker as the one to work on. From here, I've got white loaded up. Let's go for the midtone. All right, and with that, now we're finished with all of the different hatching, stippling, and tonal values for this exercise. The last thing we want to do is to clean this up to make the edges look a little bit more presentable. Remember, we've been working on our drawing layer, so anything that you need to change, do make sure you've got just this layer selected. What we want to do now is use our eraser tool and go through and clean up any of these stray lines so that everything stays nicely within the box. Here's how I'm going to do that. If you'll select your eraser tool and then go up to your drop-down menu, let's see if we can find our square brushes. I'm going to close these up. If we look under our, there they are, square brushes down this one. This will give us a nice squared off tip. We'll choose one of these. Let's choose one of the larger ones. And if you need to, we can make it a little bit larger. That looks good. So about 30 to 40 pixels. We'll make mine 40 pixels tall. With this brush, of course it's an eraser, so you can click and drag around and erase away what's here. What I want to show you is how to erase in a straight line. If you click once, I'm going to use my mouse in order to do this. So you can let go of your drawing tablet. But if you click once with your mouse, then hold the Shift key and then drag to the left or the right, it'll constrain your drawing in that particular direction. I'll do Command Z to undo that. Now if you click once and hold Shift and go up and down, it'll also get rid of everything just in a vertical direction. The main thing to remember is to click, then hold Shift. If you hold Shift later, it's not going to give you the results that you want. But to clean up these edges, all I've got to do is to place my cursor right in between, hold down Shift after I click, and then drag, and it will clean it up. So let's do this edge. Hold down Shift, click once, hold down Shift, and then drag down, and that will get all of those lines. So let's do it for each of the edges. Click once, hold Shift, and drag down. You can see how that will automatically erase away everything that's in between. We'll do the same for this side. Click once and drag down after holding Shift. Do it to this edge. Click and drag, clean up, and clean up. Of course, now I can start to do it for the in-between here. So I can click once. Maybe I'll make my brush slightly larger. There we go. Click once and see how much it's going to take away. And then when I hold down Shift and drag, it's going to clean up all of those edges nice and evenly. Very good. Click and drag. Click and drag. Do this between each of your different squares to clean up the edges, making them look as straight as possible. All right, now that we're finished, let's save this as a Photoshop file. Go up to File, down to Save. This is going to prompt you how to save it up. First off, you can keep it as Tonal Practice, but add your name to it so that I can differentiate yours between the others that are in the class. Once you've got your name, make sure the format is set to Photoshop. This will save up all of your layers and everything that you've done, and then you can hit Save. Upload this Photoshop file to the Moodle page for the exercise.